Hi, this is Margaret Maloney, and welcome to the Death Dhamma Podcast. Open and honest discussions with wise and skillful teachers about their experiences with life, death, and Buddhism. If you wonder how others on the path have dealt with death and dying and grief, then be sure to listen in. Everybody has a story, a perspective, and a valuable lesson to share. Embrace death, live a full life, and learn how to love impermanence. Because as my dear father used to say, nobody gets out of this alive. You are going to really enjoy listening to Timber Hawkeye and the wonderfully fresh perspective that he brings to our experiences with grief and death and emotions and suffering and how we don't need to suffer. Timber Hawkeye is the best-selling author of Buddhist Boot Camp and Faithfully Religionless, his books, and the Buddhist Boot Camp Podcast, so you can find him and listen to him even more. He offers a secular and non-sectarian approach to being at peace with the world within and around us, with the intention to awaken, enlighten, enrich, and inspire. And I certainly felt enriched and inspired after having had the opportunity to speak with him, and I know that you will too.
I think it has a lot to do with how they were first introduced to death and how they were raised and whether their family talked about it or just kept the kids, out of the picture when death was happening in the family. And I guess for me, from a very early age, death was front and center. And we, as a family, never shied away from talking about death or anything else. So nothing was off the table, so to speak.
Can you share with us why it was that way?
I was born and raised in Israel.
Okay.
And every morning we would wake up and listen to the news as we would get ready for school, work, etc. And on the news, they would repeatedly, every morning, recap how many Israeli soldiers were killed the day before.
Oh.
And it was just like this daily tally that we went through, and my mother's reaction to it was always very dramatic and traumatic and just a lot of tears. And I at first was very taken aback by it, like, wow, this must be this really horrible thing that's happening because my mother's reacting to it this way. But when it happened morning after morning, I don't mean to sound cold or insensitive, but I remember asking her one day, as she was crying over the soldiers who were killed the day before, I said, "Did you know them?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, then can we speed this up? Because I still have to get ready for school and, like life still goes on and you got to go to work. Like this is really, in a way it felt, and again, for lack of a better or perhaps more sensitive word, it felt unnecessary to go through that process. So
this was part of your morning routine.
It was. And then when like my grandfather passed away, I remember there was a funeral, but it was interesting that it wasn't as traumatic, I think, because I think for everyone, life itself prepares us gradually, in the sense that as children, first, like your goldfish dies, and then your maybe dog dies, and then maybe your grandparents, and then maybe your parents or friends or whatnot. Everyone's got a different order, but it starts out very gradual. And as I said in the beginning, if we don't learn to deal with it in a healthy fashion at a young age, and we sweep it under the rug, we don't talk about it, we don't address it, we don't unpack it, then later in life, when it's something bigger than a goldfish or a pet or someone who is a distant relative, then it hits us really hard because it's the first time we're talking about it, facing it, addressing it. So I'm, in a way, really glad I was raised in a country where that was part of daily life. Yeah. And I think we all are, no matter where you are in the world, especially nowadays, if there's some sort of, murder or something in the other corner of the world through YouTube or through the media and internet, we can know about it. So I think in that regard, our interconnectivity has opened our eyes to, granted, just because our eyes are open doesn't mean we're looking at it. So
True.
I'm
Just because
glad
our
that,
eyes are open doesn't mean our eyes are open.
yeah. So I'm really glad you're kind of putting us in a box of mirrors, that it doesn't matter where we look, we have to look at this stuff. There's no escaping it. And that, in a nutshell, is death itself. There's no escaping it. Might as well look at it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Because I guess I do think of it that way. And I know that some people find me annoying and like to distance themselves from me, which is fine. There'd probably be another reason for that anyway, right? But I do know a friend one time was like, why would you talk about, why don't you just wait until you have to go through it again? Isn't that enough? And I guess the answer is no, it's not enough.
And, when people say we'll cross that bridge when we get there, I think they're overlooking the fact that we are all on that bridge.
We are.
We're already on it. Like, this is not something that may or may not happen, and we'll worry about it when it does. We're on the bridge. There's no reason to worry about it necessarily, but the better prepared we are throughout life to emotionally and perhaps spiritually and mentally process it, the more we are at peace with it, I think, while we're alive, then in a sense, if we live in peace, then we can die in peace.
Yes.
But if we spend our entire lives clinging and hanging on, I saw a quote the other day that said, everything I've ever let go of had claw marks in it. And
thank you so much for that. Oh my gosh, I love that.
It's true, and so if that's how we go through life, I can only imagine how traumatizing that last breath can be, because we would be clinging as opposed to embracing the unknown, accepting the unknown, perhaps even looking forward to the unknown.
Could you share, if you don't mind, your perspective on why it's important to have a peaceful death?
For the same reason it's important to have a peaceful life. It's this incredible experience that, many people go through life with the notion of proceed with caution.
Mm-hmm.
And I go through life with the mantra, proceed with curiosity, because that immediately moves me out of fear, especially when the fear is not, I don't know what the right word is. There's no reason for it, in the sense that it's not something that's happened that we know is going to be horrible. It's something that we've never experienced before and we have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So why would we jump into the worst case scenario unless we've spent our entire lives living with that mentality of what's the worst case scenario? What's how bad could it be? And then, so the way we live our lives perhaps is the way we die our deaths, is either with curiosity or with absolute fear.
That's a great analogy. I appreciate that. Can I go back to your mom for a minute? Not in a weird way. Like, tell me about your mother. Not like that. Just a question about, I am just curious, do you recall, there's two things I was wondering. First was when you said to her, hey, can we, go about our day here? I don't know if you remember her response.
I don't.
And then I wonder, okay, that makes sense, because it was you were a kid, right?
I was a kid, and I just remember not being able to wrap my mind around it. That's what resonates with me. That's what kind of kept with me, is already knowing, I hate to say this, but just like a dad maybe slaps his son, and the kid's like, what's that for? And the dad's like, well, I'm sure you're going to do something later today that's going to deserve that. In that regard, it's like, okay, if you're going to cry, can we just cry for the rest of the week today, just so it's done? And that's what I mean.
Like, this off our to-do list.
Yeah, because it just seemed, and then, thinking about it myself, like, is mourning, and it's tough too. I don't know if mourning is even the right word. I spoke with someone the other day who said the the hardest thing for a parent to have to go through is the death of their child. Like, no parent wants their child to die before them. And someone else said, I don't think that's true. I think the hardest thing for a parent to go through is when their child is still alive but wants nothing to do with them.
Oh.
And I think that resonates more with me, because death is going to happen when it happens. It's the great unknown, and that's what's beautiful about it. No one does death to you. You know what I mean? Like, that
Right.
person didn't do anything to you that hurts. But if someone is still alive in your life now and choosing not to be in it, choosing to disconnect from you, that hurts, I think, a lot more. That was my first experience of grief. It wasn't someone dying.
Okay.
It was someone choosing not to be in my life.
So someone saying you were dead to them.
Yes, which ironically, and at first was my parents, who disowned me when I was 18 for a few years and then came back into my life. But it was very much, you are dead to me. We want nothing to do with you. And just because they didn't approve of who I chose to date at the time. And that felt like a betrayal. Whereas someone dying, they didn't betray you, they died. Like, you can't hold it against them. You can't, so the whole idea of grieving death seems very egoistic in a sense. It's why I've always shied away from funerals or just public displays of grieving, because it stops being about the person who passed away and starts being about poor me, and I'm the one who's left behind. And I'm a much bigger fan of life celebrations. When someone passes away, we celebrate that they were in our lives, not focus on poor me, they're not in my life anymore.
Yeah.
And I've been called a robot and cold and insensitive, and I because I don't subscribe to the typical reaction to death that we're socially supposed to.
Sure. What do you think it is that we're socially supposed to do? Like, what would you say is that? How am I supposed to act?
Devastation comes to mind.
Okay.
The outward, very verbal and vocal grieving, in Jewish culture, it's the wearing black for a whole week, covering mirrors, mourning. It's just like, oh my gosh, like, it just seems so, I think, counterintuitive to me that you can have family living on the opposite coast or another part of the world that you never, while they're alive or you're alive, make the time to go visit or stay in touch. But as soon as there's the death in the family, everyone packs up and goes clear across there for the funeral. And you never made time for them while they were alive. Why now? It just seems...
why don't we spend our time and money on the visit to see the living instead of spending time and money
to be seen at their funeral? That's just it. It's not about seeing the living anymore. It's to be seen as the caring family member.
I mean, like, the obligation of the checklist of Timber was here, check.
Yeah.
Margaret was here, check.
Yeah, and so was not here. They must not have been a close friend of the family. They must not care. That the fact that we are there after the person is alive, dies, somehow holds more weight
than having been there when they were alive.
It doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't. Point.
I will throw in that after my husband died, I did have a couple of people question me, and my coping mechanism was work, so I threw myself into work. And I remember it was maybe 2.5 months after he died, I was going on a business trip, and I'll always remember somebody looked right at me and she goes, "What are you doing going on that trip when you should be home grieving?"
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's the
that's
answer to your question. What does it
yeah,
look like? It's
yeah,
that. It's
it's
that what
that.
you should be.
What should you be doing? And I think I looked at her and I said, I can be sad anywhere, which was true. And
Yeah.
I would do my work. I'd cry. And then when I could do my work, I could stop crying and then I'd cry again. And, that was the process. But yeah, so yeah, there's some expectations there. You're right.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
right. But so I appreciate your talking about this concept of grieving, not necessarily about a death, but about grief. For example, that grief of having parents disown you, or the grief of
The
somebody.
loss of a relationship,
Yeah.
some a divorce, or I mean, sometimes a divorce can be a happy celebration as well, but just,
True.
it's just the grieving. And sometimes even when a relationship ends and we grieve, I find that it's often not, we don't miss the person, we miss the relationship, we miss that companionship. And it's really important, I guess, to me, is to compartmentalize, like, is the heartache associated with the individual or with what they offered, and you're grieving the fact that that's no longer going to be in your life.
There,
you know
sure. Like I don't have somebody to go to the bookstore with anymore, or
whatever brought you comfort, and you're like, shoot, that's out of my life now, and that takes some getting used to. But it's still, again, even saying that, it's like, poor me. It's very much a pity party for one. And I think, since we can choose how we feel, why would we choose to focus on that? Just kind of redirect, if that makes sense. What can I focus on? And that's what I love about life celebrations. You're focusing on how grateful you are that they were in your life, rather than how sad you are that they're not anymore.
So do you help throw life celebrations, or you go to them, or it's just
I'm an introvert on the spectrum. I don't do parties. so
Yay, thank you. There's a shout out for introverts everywhere. I identify as an introvert too. Clearly I identify as an introvert too. That's why my big shout out there. Yes. Okay. So do you have some things you recommend for someone who's grieving, whether it be from a death or a broken relationship? What has helped you? What have you found to be helpful?
What I found early in life, my first year of high school, is when we moved from Israel to the States. And at that time, it was very much, moving thousands of miles away to a whole other country, and kind of realizing I'm never going to see these people ever again.
That's a lot.
And so later in life, when someone died, and this was during I was living in the Bay Area. This was during the whole AIDS pandemic, when people were dying left and right because we didn't know what was killing them. And that's another, now that I'm talking about it, that may have been another contributor to my point of view on death, is when people were diagnosed, they would throw what they called death parties, meaning they would invite everyone to their house. We would all go, we'd have a really good time. They would have all their friends around them. And we all knew that when we all go home, they're going to kill themselves. It was their goodbye party. So I was exposed to that. And in my mind, in order to cope with all that death, I just pretended or told myself they just moved to Europe, meaning that they, like I did, from one part of the world to another, knowing I'm never going to see these people again. Is I don't know where they went, but in my young mind's, in my perspective, Europe was like really far away. So they just went somewhere so far away that I'm not going to see them again.
Okay.
But I don't know what they're up to, what their death is going to be like, but they're gone. So it's very much like a bon voyage rather than a poor me, if that makes sense, or even poor them. I mean, especially when so many chose to die, they're like, I'm choosing the unknown over the known suffering. And
because at that time it was such a horrible way.
It was almost a definitive, like, if you're diagnosed, you have AIDS, that your days are numbered, and those days are brutal. And so they say, I want to go out on my own terms, so to speak. I want to go out while I'm still feeling good, and I don't want to spend the last few days of my life gasping for air and everyone around me feeling sorry for me. I want to have a party, say
Mm-hmm.
goodbye to everyone, thank them for being in my life, and then embrace the unknown. And I found strength and empowerment and courage in that,
Mm-hmm.
and realized that was going to come up. But as we talk
Mm-hmm.
about death and kind of peeling back the layers when I was exposed to it first, that
Mm-hmm.
I think that must have contributed as well to my point of view.
I'm thinking at some point, so I really appreciate that they're just gone coping mechanism, that he's just gone, he's in Europe,
Yeah.
he's moved to Europe. I may never see him again because
Yeah.
that's how life is. But I'm getting this sense that at some point you reconciled the reality.
Well, they, except the reality is much greater than Europe. They went into the great unknown. They went on the ultimate adventure that we all get to go on.
Okay.
And, and very much like, I don't like watching trailers for movies before I watch the movies. And I don't look up information about hiking trails before on a hike because I want to be surprised. I don't want to see a preview or get an idea of what to expect. I want to go in just completely in awe of every experience, just embrace it. I don't want to embrace or accept some notion of what life after death is going to be like.
Okay.
Especially when nobody really knows. I just don't like the idea of coming up with a theory of what happens afterwards, because ultimately nobody knows. And that's so exciting to me. Not so much that I'm going to end my own life today,
Right.
but so when the day comes, I'm going to go on that journey with the same enthusiasm I went on a backpacking trip across New Zealand. It was just
Mhm.
like, let's see what unfolds.
I like that. I think that's so nice. That's really refreshing. Just let's just go. When it's time to go, let's go. And let's go with some excitement because we don't know what's going to be on this trip.
No, and it could be
We don't know.
great.
We have no reason to think it's going to be anything but interesting, exciting things.
But I think, again, as we spoke earlier, that it ties directly into how you live your life.
Hmm.
If you live your life thinking, oh my gosh, what if it's horrible? What if it's bad? What if I don't want to go? Should I look it up? Should I look at what possible? Does the hiking trail have snakes on it? Oh my God, let it go. Just go and just have the experience. I don't check the weather. I don't, I'm just like,
Right.
I'm just, and that may be seen as irresponsible by some, but mainly by those who overplan and overbook and, and that's why I think it's such an individual experience.
Hmm.
And in my experience, life has been such an incredible journey itself, not knowing one day from the next what's going to unfold. No matter how much I try to plan, no matter how much I try to look ahead, no matter how many reviews someone leaves about a trail, their experience is going to be different from
Yeah.
mine. So I don't give it any weight. I take it all with a big grain of salt, if I take it at all, and just proceed with curiosity, not caution.
That is so helpful. Thank you. I will share that I am a little bit of a planner. So probably on the hike, I probably would do, but I also am directionally impaired. So hopefully not true in life as I go towards death, but maybe I'll make a wrong turn there too. So yeah, I tend to look things up a little bit, but I love your attitude. It's so helpful because what I have learned, even though planner is like, you can't plan everything, or you think you can, but all you do is, to me anyway, my own experience, all I'll do is just make myself nuts. So, I'll have some
Yeah,
basic things, like I'll make sure there's gas in the car, and I'll make sure I know where I'm going, and, maybe a little bit, because again, I do tend to get lost. But then sometimes on a hike, sometimes you see the most beautiful things when you take the wrong turn, when you go left or
and
when
that's
you go
why,
right.
see, and that's why I'm
Yes.
caught up on the word wrong turn. We
Yes.
can't make a wrong turn. That
It's like
was
a
part
turn.
of the journey. That was it. You're supposed to be there. And maybe that's faith,
Uh-huh.
that what is meant for me will never miss me, and that which misses me was never meant for me. So I just really trust the unknown more than I trust my limited perspective. The only thing I know for certain is that I don't know anything for certain. So why would I put so much faith in that as opposed to whatever the great unknown has directed my life so far and always provided and kept me here for as long as it has? It clearly knows more than I do.
You know, that is, so for someone like me who has been a planner, and okay, so spoiler alert, in my other world, I teach project management. So I do teach people how to plan and schedule things. And yet, as I've learned about Buddhism and, you know, became a Buddhist, one of the things that was the most refreshing to me was not having to know the answers.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. That's what drew me to it. And I think, not to be taken out of context about the opposite extreme, we planned this interview, we planned
Yes.
for it. However, we're very well aware that maybe the internet connection goes down, maybe something happens and you can't make it. And so it's not being attached to the end result. It's having no perceived it has to happen, and it has, no white knuckling. It's just this very loose kind of, let's see if we connect on that day. And if the universe has other plans in mind, like the power goes out and all of the state, then we just read a book and we do this another time.
Try again.
I just don't have any attachment to my plan. It's very tentative.
I think that's such a nice way to live. You mentioned the word faith. You said maybe that's having faith. That's not exactly how you said it, and I'm just curious because sometimes I don't know if have you ever found some people don't want to use the word faith with Buddhism?
Yes, because faith is usually attributed to a God, or a creator or some theory that you believe in blindly through faith. That's not how I use it. That's why actually my memoir is called Faithfully Religionless, which really catches people off guard, not just because it's a tongue twister, but because, wait a minute, he's faithful, but he's religionless. Like, how does that work? Because my faith has nothing to do with religion. And I remember even at the monastery, I was living there, but I also love studying other religions and philosophies and psychology simultaneously to understand what people believe and why we believe what we do. I appreciated that the monastery taught a particular path, but I said, but I miss having discussions about other faiths. Like, there's just I remember asking one of the elder monks, I said, there's no mention of God. And he just laughed hysterically. And he said, what do you think emptiness is? Oh. And I'm like, wait a minute. All this talk in Buddhism about emptiness can just be, we can just put the word God in there. And he goes, yeah, if that makes it easier for you, sure. And I was just like, just mind blown, because it's just a word in another faith to attribute to the great unknown. It's just emptiness. And I was like, wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, if people have a difficult time with the word faith, but they prefer the word trust, the way I look at it is we made it through everything that's happened in our lives so far. So our track record's 100%. So if I'm in Las Vegas and I'm going to take a bet on whether you are going to make it through whatever comes next, I'm going to put all my money on you because your track record's 100%. Chances are you'll make it through what comes next.
Okay.
I don't know what you want to call that. Faith, trust, betting the odds. I don't know. But it's that's, it's interesting though, because faith and everything being okay is tricky because the definition of okay needs to be examined, not the definition of faith.
Yes.
I know I'm going to be okay no matter what. Now that means I may get in a car accident tomorrow, but that doesn't mean I'm not okay anymore. That just means I was in a car accident. Right. So really broadening, expanding our definition of what okay is.
It's really important. And it's not clinging. Part of that,
the end result.
Not clinging to being the same as I was before the car accident, or not clinging to having a perfect auto insurance record. Or
not clinging to anything. I mean, that's what Buddhism is really about. If you encapsulate all of Buddhism into a tiny little pill you can swallow, it's pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And when I first heard that, I thought, optional. You mean we choose to suffer?
Why would I do that?
Why? And so that's became my lifelong question. Why do we do that? And what I've gotten to so far is that the full equation is pain plus resistance equals suffering.
Oh,
So it's resistance that causes suffering. It's not the pain of the inevitable old age, sickness, and death that causes suffering. It's our resistance to old age, sickness, and death that causes suffering.
And I dig my little heels in and go, no, I don't want to.
The resistance, the grasping of this is not how it should be. This is not how it was supposed to be. This is not, we had a meeting scheduled. Wow.
Now what do I
That's why letting go is such a big part of Buddhism, and the non-attachment, the being in the present moment. And that's why going right back to death and grieving, it so contradicts what I believe Buddhism is all about. It's, are you stuck in the past? Are you thinking about the future? Are you somewhere other than the present moment? In the present moment, all is well. It's, our definition of well needs to change constantly.
Yes.
And if it doesn't, then we're the problem. We're the ones choosing to suffer. That suffering is optional. We're the ones. And it may not be conscious choice. I do want to clarify that. We may unconsciously be clinging to something, unaware that we're doing it. And that's what Buddhism does. It holds a mirror to us and says, look what you're doing. Not what life is doing to you, not what the person who died did to you. Well, look what you're doing to yourself. You're creating that suffering by resisting, by not accepting, by not embracing, by not surrendering, whatever word you're comfortable with. Every religion has its different path. And what I love about Buddhism is that I don't consider it a religion. There is no God. There's no creation theory. And it goes right back to what you were saying. You ask any Buddhist, how'd the world start? Who created it? The answer you get everywhere is, I don't know.
Right.
And I love not knowing. I love it. It's the ultimate mystery to me. And it's also the ultimate fear factor for most people, which explains why they're so afraid of death. They need to know. The planner in them needs to know. What should I pack?
Tomorrow.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Don't pack anything. You can't pack anything.
When I go downstairs, will I still be able to make coffee? What's going to happen? Yeah, it's true. We want to. Things don't happen the way we think, we get thrown off.
Do we not go downstairs? You know, it's like, no, go downstairs, see what happens, you know?
Yeah, I don't want to know. You know, so at some point, so you grew up with death, you know, and there were these notices every day because you're in Israel and there's war going on and constant battles and soldiers are dying every day. And every day your mother's seeing the list and, you know, and then eventually it moves to your family. You lose your grandfather. You lose friends in the AIDS pandemic. Somewhere in there came Buddhism.
Oh, no. Buddhism came way later in life.
Okay, yeah. So I was just curious, like,
how did that come in? Yeah.
How did that change the perspective?
Oh, it didn't. It reaffirmed it in the sense that I didn't live my life a certain way, then discover Buddhism and change my life to better fit it. I lived my life in a very unique way compared to everyone around me that was very different and non-traditional until one day a friend of mine said, you know, Timber, you're like a Buddhist monk. And I'm like, what does that mean? And I had to look it up. And I'm like looking up what Buddhist monks believe and what Buddhism's all about. And I'm like, dude, you're right. Like, this is so me. And then I looked into Buddhism and I'm like, wow, I'm not alone at this. There's an entire, I remember the first time I heard the Dalai Lama speak, a friend just invited me. I didn't even know who he was. A friend invited me to come here and speak. So I go and he's there talking about self-control, determination, and freedom from anger. And I looked at my friend. I'm like, I have those words tattooed on my chest for 3 years now. Who is this guy? This is my gig. So I was so unaware that there is an entire, not just school of thought that believes what I do, but there are 800 different schools of Buddhism, all believing some form of what I've already embraced. So Buddhism just in many ways already perfectly fit what I already believed, but in other ways went beyond. Like Stephen Batchelor is one of my favorite authors. He wrote Buddhism Without Beliefs and Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist, which coming from the man who was responsible for translating most of the Lotus Sutras and the Heart Sutra and all of it. I mean, that was his life's work. The more he studied Buddhism, the less he believed in it.
Interesting.
In the religious sense.
Okay.
In the, wait a minute, if Buddhism embraces the unknown and says we don't know, he had a hard time accepting the whole concept of reincarnation, as do I.
Okay.
Did we just come up with a theory of our own, heaven or hell, to make death less scary? You know, or to guilt people into live a good life because it depends on how you live your life. That's what your next life is going to be like. And it's like, sure. Whoa, there's guilt and there's fear and there's all this stuff that is inherent in organized religion. Now it's in here, like that. This is why I didn't want organized religion in the first place. So it's really important for me to separate Buddhism from reincarnation, as it is for Stephen Batchelor as well. And that kind of gave me permission to embrace Buddhism, but a very non-sectarian version of it. And my teachers told me, you know, there's 800 different sects, but there are also many Buddhists who don't ascribe to any sect, except there are so many of them that now non-sectarian is a sect in and of itself. Oh,
sure. That makes sense.
It's not that Buddhism found its way in there. It's that I ultimately realized religion or philosophy, it's a collection of beliefs and philosophies. And I had my own, it just wasn't organized. And when I discovered Buddhism, I found it most closely matched my own.
Okay. So it was a fit. I'm going to use a phrase and then you can tell me if it works appropriately or not. Like coming home. Was it like coming home? Or, you know, when you were trying to describe something and then somebody said it back to you and you're like, oh yeah, it's like that.
Yeah. It was more of, I'm not alone. It wasn't a home. But again, association, home for me was never a good place.
Not a good
yeah.
place.
So for me, it was just like, I'm running away from home. You know, I'm running away from the norm, from the traditional, from all of that, and feeling so alone, like I'm the outcast. And then the fog lifts and you look around and you're like, I'm surrounded by outcasts. And it just felt so liberating and so that non-conformity is okay.
Mm-hmm. Non-judgmental. Did it feel non-judgmental?
Yeah. There was no, oh, you're an outcast. You're breaking some law. We need to lock you up. It was, you just don't ascribe to the laws that other members of society choose to ascribe to. But that's on you. There's no one going to arrest you for that.
It's okay. It's okay. You can keep being.
Exactly. I think that's what it was. It was like, all these years of therapy come through to, you don't need to decide. You can just be.
You don't have to pick a side.
Yes. And that felt very, I think, liberating. The cover of my memoir is a tiny little figure with huge wings.
Oh.
It's the tattoo on my back. It's what life feels like, that we are so free and you cannot put this bird in a cage.
That's perfect. I love that. If I can ask, if you would give advice to someone who was grieving, whether it be a death
that's right.
or a relationship.
I didn't even answer your question. I think you already asked and I somehow got sidetracked.
And that I will just take us both back to the path we went was the path we were meant to be on, because everything you said is so helpful for people who feel like they're not traditional or that they're not a particular sect, but they like Buddhism. So can they do that? And yes, the answer is yes, you can.
Yeah, the answer is you can do. And maybe that's, now in hindsight, I'm wondering if the reason I didn't answer that question is subconsciously, I can't imagine giving someone else advice on how they quote unquote should grieve, to do the exact same thing that I don't like society doing to me. It's like, do what feels right for you. You know, I don't personally believe in the concept of closure, for example. It's just a story we tell ourselves to prolong our suffering because we feel like we should be suffering. What I love that Thich Nhat Hanh said is, when we learn how to suffer, we suffer much less. And that is really, really helpful, because I talk a lot about the difference between feelings and emotions. And in a really small nutshell, I'll just encapsulate it that a feeling lasts 45 seconds to a minute and a half, and then it moves on to the next feeling and the next feeling and the next feeling. An emotion starts out as a feeling, but instead of moving on to the next one, we write a narrative about it, a story about why we feel this way and how we shouldn't feel this way, and that person should have done that and all this. And then no matter what the emotion is, we can feel angry about something for 20 years instead of a minute and a half.
Wow.
Because we carry that narrative with us. This is how people hold a grudge for so long and all that. Whatever it was that upset them 20 years ago, totally valid. Someone upset you, got angry, done.
Right.
But your inability to move on, even though life has moved on, everything has moved on, that person may be out of your life. But if you're still angry about it, that's that anger today. That's not a feeling, that's an emotion.
Oh.
So for me, emotional maturity means not being upset today about something that upset you yesterday. By all means, let it upset you again today, but don't carry it with you from day to day. So very much what you said about going on that business trip. I can be sad anywhere, and when a moment comes up and I feel the sadness take over me, cry your eyes out, feel it 100%, but then move on to the next feeling. The alternative is to prolong the suffering. I don't know if that makes sense, that distinction.
Does. As you're speaking, I'm thinking of someone I know, and she also went through the death of her husband. And I remember, let me think, how long was it after he died? Not that time should, there's a lot of shoulds around time,
Yes.
Like you said, the tradition of the black for a week and the covering the mirrors. And then a year later, I think there's the stone sitting, and, there's all these things that we create, which I truly believe are meant to be helpful, but sometimes they feel like a prison, depending on if they're really helping you or not. And so I remember a period of time after, about a year and a half after her husband died, I invited her to something, and it was a celebratory event. And her answer back was, "I'm sorry, I just can't come. This is just not a time in my life where I can be happy. This is my time." And I think she actually used either the words, "This is my time to be unhappy," or "This is still my time to be sad." Yeah. And that hurt me, but I hurt my heart for her. I don't mean, but I didn't say much back because I thought, this is her
That's
journey.
her choice.
This is her journey, Margaret, be quiet. But so when you said, closure, I thought, so now I'm connecting.
So that's a narrative. It's a story. Yeah. The concept of closure.
She'll decide that time ends, and that will be closure, I guess, huh?
Yeah. It's kind of, and the way we prolong our suffering is often how we talk about this scenario, in the sense that I talked to a guy the other day, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, 20 years ago, I went through this horrible, painful, traumatic divorce that would just went on and just tore our family apart and all that." And I was like, "Wow, can you tell me that again without using adjectives?" And he said, 20 years ago, I went through a divorce. And I said, "Now, how does that feel any lighter?" And he goes, "Yeah, for 20 years, I've been carrying that narrative, that story, that it was horrible, treacherous, horrible, traumatic, dramatic." I was like, "You've been adding weight to this."
Yes.
And for 20 years, dude, just drop the adjectives. It's the difference between an observation and a judgment. Just, this is what happened, period. Everything else is our emotional judgment narrative of how it happened according to us, our projection of how it should be, shouldn't have been. It happened, period.
Wow, seems like a really useful practice for so many things.
So maybe that's my advice, if you would, is watch your adjectives. Yeah.
Yes, drop the adjectives. He died. I live on my own now.
Not, "Oh my gosh, it's so sad, I'm living on my own." No, then you're judging it, you're projecting, because you could be, yes, "I'm now restarted. I'm now," you know what I mean? It's a whole new beginning. It's and the way we live our life with that perspective of every breath, every moment is a new opportunity. If that's how we embrace the unknown, that's what death is going to be like, I believe, is that it's beautiful. Just going to be this really beautiful, "Come here, death. Show me what you got."
I like that. I hope whenever my time comes, if I'm, aware enough in that moment, I hope that I have that attitude, "Come here,
it's
Bring it.
it's it's the same I do in my morning meditation,
Mm-hmm.
being aware that within me there is that somewhat of a duality of that there's the ego within and then there's the God within, spirit, whatever you're comfortable with, the higher whatever. And I say good morning to both of them. It's not about diminishing or destroying the ego and killing, because then you're spending your entire life fighting the ego, which just reaffirms the ego and gives it more the attention. The ego is like the celebrities who don't care what's written about them in the paper as long as they're being written about in the paper.
Yes.
And so I just say good morning ego, good morning God. Ego, I've listened to you for so many years, I'm going to listen to the other voice instead. And after a while the ego's like, all right, I figured as much. Just, it's whichever voice we listen to is the one that gets louder, and whichever voice we don't, it gets quieter, and it just becomes our new neural pathway, our new approach to life and death.
Thank you. Is there anything that you wanted to share that you didn't get to share, or anything? I always say this, I will use the should word in this sentence. Was there something I should have asked you that I didn't? And you're like, Margaret, I want you to ask me, or I would like to say.
I'm sure we can talk about this for hours. I mean,
True.
this is a conversation that goes on, and ultimately we don't know. So the conversation itself is for nothing other than entertainment purposes.
Okay.
Because we're just entertaining ideas about something nobody has any clue about. It's when someone asks me what I think about death, I'm like, I don't give it much thought because I'm pretty busy thinking about life. Like what can we do while we're here? And there's plenty.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you even opening the discussion and having it and making people in even uncomfortable. I realize that some of what I've said, again, may make someone uncomfortable, but that's a good thing. I think when we are pushed outside our comfort zone, that's where growth is. That's where, all right, the opposite of what I know is also true to somebody else somewhere else because of their time, place, and circumstance. And it doesn't mean that I nullify someone else's 1.5 year long grieving experience. I think you said it best when you said, if that's her coping mechanism, if that works for her, that's great for her. We come in when someone realizes, what I'm doing isn't working for me. I need something else. That's where this comes in. That's where all the options are. What else can I do? Here are all the other options.
Thank you. You're right. And that's really the goal of this talk and others, is for people to understand different perspectives and learn from other people and say, oh, here, maybe somebody who hasn't heard of you before will go, oh, here is this man Timber. And oh, what a great perspective. We don't know. Oh, I didn't know it was okay that I didn't know.
Yeah, or the difference between feelings and emotions, or whatever it is. That's why I'm just there planting seeds, even when I do my book talks and tours and discussions. And I speak everywhere from churches to maximum security prisons to schools to whatever. I jump so much information just hoping at least one thing sticks. And if one thing sticks and they walk away with this new seed, then they spend the rest of their life watering it, and it may sprout, it may not. That I can't control.
This has been the Death Dhamma podcast with Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. And if you liked it, please share it with your friends and your Sangha members and leave reviews. May you be well, may you be happy, may you be safe, may you be free from suffering, and may you come visit me and join my community at margaretmaloney.com, MargaretMeloni, and check out Carpooling with Death, how living with death will make you stronger, wiser, and fearless. Now you can find it on Amazon in Kindle, audio, paperback, and hardback. Bye for now.